She was, for a time, the most famous woman in the world, a symbol of grace and style for an entire generation. But after the cameras stopped flashing and the crowds went home, Jackie Kennedy largely vanished from the public eye. This is the untold story of her profound health battles, from the crippling trauma that haunted her for decades to the devastating diagnosis that would ultimately claim her life. So what were the health scares that forced one of the 20th century's most iconic figures to retreat from the world? Before the tragedy, there was Camelot. At just 31 years old, Jacqueline Lee Bouvier Kennedy became one of the youngest first ladies in American history. She was more than a president's wife. She was a global icon. She brought a new sense of culture and sophistication to the White House, undertaking a historic restoration of the mansion and charming world leaders with her fluency in French and conversational Spanish. She was also a devoted mother, even setting up a school and playgroup for her children, Caroline and John Jr., right there in the White House solarium to give them some semblance of a normal life. To the public, she was the epitome of elegance and strength. But behind that polished facade, her life was already marked by private pain. She'd endured a miscarriage and a stillborn daughter in the 1950s. Then, just months before that fateful trip to Dallas, she and the president suffered another heartbreaking loss. Their son, Patrick, was born prematurely and died only 2 days later. The loss plunged Jackie into a deep depression, a private grief she was still navigating. This pattern of immense public poise hiding profound personal sorrow would come to define her. She was a master of presenting a carefully constructed image to a world that demanded it. But the events of November 22, 1963, would shatter that control in a way no one could have ever imagined. Dallas, Texas, November 22, 1963. The sun was shining as the presidential motorcade rolled through Dealey Plaza. Jackie, radiant in a pink suit, sat beside her husband, President John F. Kennedy. In an instant, the cheers turned to screams, a gunshot, then another. The world watched in horror as the dream of Camelot was destroyed in a matter of seconds. Jackie Kennedy witnessed her husband's assassination from inches away. The trauma was immediate and absolute. As she cradled her dying husband, her now iconic pink suit was soaked in his blood, a horrifying symbol of the violence that had just unfolded. In the chaotic hours that followed aboard Air Force One, she refused to change her clothes. Her reasoning was chillingly deliberate. Let them see what they've done. In the days that followed, the world saw a widow of unbelievable dignity. She planned her husband's state funeral, modeling it after Abraham Lincoln's, and led a nation in mourning. Her strength seemed almost superhuman. But what many people don't know is that this composure was a mask for a deep and terrifying psychological wound that would never fully heal. The smiling, graceful First Lady was gone, replaced by a woman who would spend the rest of her life battling the invisible demons born in Dallas. In the 1960s, post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't a term people used. It wouldn't be officially recognized as a diagnosis until the 1980s. Because of this, Jacqueline Kennedy suffered in silence, her symptoms misunderstood by almost everyone. But looking back, it's clear. Jackie was a textbook case of severe PTSD. Biographer Barbara Leeming even compared her experience to that of a combat veteran, forever haunted by what she had witnessed. For the next 30 years, she was tormented by intrusive flashbacks. These weren't just bad memories. She would relive the assassination as if it were happening all over again. She confessed to friends and in private letters the depths of her despair, admitting to suicidal thoughts, held back only by the need to care for her 2 young children. Her son John Jr. once told a teacher his mother cried herself to sleep every night. She suffered from insomnia and nightmares, and some biographers suggest she struggled with alcohol to numb the pain. The trauma manifested in unpredictable ways, including bouts of intense anger. She was consumed by survivor's guilt, endlessly replaying those few seconds in her mind. torturing herself with the impossible question of whether she could have done something differently. She began organizing her entire life around avoiding triggers, a loud noise, a certain kind of heat, anything that could plunge her back into the horror of that day. This was the secret battle that defined her life after the White House, a constant, exhausting effort to keep the overwhelming trauma at bay. After Dallas, Jackie's world was shattered, and so was her sense of security. She and her children moved to Georgetown, but their home quickly became a tourist attraction, with tour buses pointing it out, offering no privacy or peace. The press was relentless. Then, in 1968, the unthinkable happened again. Her brother-in-law, Robert F. Kennedy, who had been a pillar of support, was assassinated. This second tragedy cemented a terrifying fear in Jackie's mind, that the Kennedy name was a magnet for violence. She grew to believe she and her children were targets. Her paranoia was fueled by suffocating media attention, especially from the paparazzi. One photographer, Ron Galella, stalked her so relentlessly that she sued him twice, testifying that his behavior made her life intolerable. It was this desperate need for protection that led to a decision that shocked America. In October 1968, she married Aristotle Onassis, a Greek shipping magnate and one of the wealthiest men in the world. To many, it seemed like a betrayal of the Kennedy legacy. But for Jackie, it was a lifeline. Onassis could give her what she craved most: privacy and security. He owned a private island, Scorpios, a fortress where she believed she and her children could finally be safe. The marriage wasn't a fairy tale. It was a transaction born out of fear. She was no longer Jackie Kennedy, America's widow. She was now Jackie O, a woman retreating behind a wall of wealth in a desperate act of self-preservation. The sense of safety she sought with Aristotle Onassis was short-lived. He died in 1975, and Jackie, a widow once again, returned to the United States. She settled in New York City in an apartment on Fifth Avenue overlooking Central Park, determined to finally build a life on her own terms. It was here, in her mid-40s, that she did something truly remarkable. She got a job. Refusing to be defined by the men she had married, Jackie became a book editor, first at Viking Press and later at Doubleday. This wasn't for show. It was a real career that she was passionate about. It gave her a sense of purpose that was entirely her own. She used her intellect and love of literature to work on books by major authors and cultural figures. She also dedicated herself to historic preservation, most famously leading a successful campaign to save Grand Central Terminal from being demolished. In these years, she found a new rhythm. She was a working mother, a grandmother, and a private citizen who enjoyed simple things, like walks in the park. She found a long-term companion in Morris Templesman, a financier who shared her quiet life. Though the public was still fascinated by her, she had finally managed to reclaim the privacy she'd so desperately sought. But just as she seemed to have found a lasting peace, a new and final battle was about to begin. The story of Jackie Kennedy is one of incredible resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship. If you're interested in more stories about iconic historical figures who shaped our world, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. For nearly 30 years, Jackie had lived with the invisible scars of psychological trauma. Her final health scare, however, was a physical one that would prove just as relentless. In November 1993, while fox hunting in Virginia, the 64-year-old was thrown from her horse. In the aftermath, doctors found a swollen lymph node in her groin. It was initially dismissed as an infection, but it didn't go away. Over the Christmas holidays, her symptoms got worse. She developed a cough, more swollen nodes in her neck, and severe stomach pains. After a series of tests, she received the diagnosis: non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a form of blood cancer. True to her nature, she faced the illness with quiet poise. She began chemotherapy in January 1994 and made a public announcement about her condition in February. At first, the prognosis seemed hopeful. She continued to work at Doubleday, determined to maintain her normal routine. She was even seen walking in Central Park, wearing a wig to cover her hair loss from the treatment, a picture of quiet determination. But the disease was aggressive. By the spring of 1994, the cancer had spread. The treatments that had initially seemed promising were no longer working. The battle she had fought so bravely and so privately was coming to an end. The woman who had survived so much was now facing her own mortality, and she would do it with the same dignity and control that had defined her entire life. When doctors delivered the final heartbreaking news in May 1994 that there was nothing more they could do, Jackie Kennedy made her last decisive choice. She had signed a living will years earlier, making it clear she did not want to be kept alive by futile medical treatments. Honoring that wish, she decided to leave the hospital and go home. She returned to her Fifth Avenue apartment, the sanctuary she had built for herself, to spend her final days surrounded by the people and things she loved. Her children, Caroline and John Jr., were right there by her side. In a life so often shaped by events beyond her control, she took charge of her final moments. On the evening of May 19, 1994, at the age of 64, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis died peacefully in her sleep. Her son, John F. Kennedy Jr., addressed the press the next day. He said his mother had passed away, surrounded by her friends and her family and her books and the people and the things that she loved. She did it in her very own way and on her own terms, and we all feel lucky for that. She was buried at Arlington National Cemetery next to President Kennedy, their infant son Patrick, and their stillborn daughter, the eternal flame she had lit decades earlier now marking her final resting place. Jacqueline Kennedy's retreat from public life wasn't a single event, but a slow withdrawal over 30 years, driven by profound health crises. The first was the invisible crippling wound of post-traumatic stress disorder, a condition that reshaped her existence and forced her to seek refuge from a world she saw as dangerous. The second was the devastating cancer she faced with the same private strength that had made her a global icon. From the blood-stained pink suit in Dallas to the quiet dignity of her final days in New York, Jackie's life was a testament to resilience. She endured tragedies that would have broken most people, yet she managed to build a new life for herself and control her own narrative to the very end. She showed the world a face of courage. But the story of her health battles reveals the true depth of her suffering and the incredible strength it took just to survive. Her story forces us to look past the myth of Camelot and see the complex, wounded, and ultimately triumphant woman who lived behind it. What do you think is Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis's most enduring legacy? Let us know in the comments below.